The only real drivability issue this car has is it sometimes has a problem cold starting, sometimes has a problem warm starting, sometimes it's neither. And what I mean by a problem is it takes quite a few cycles cranking, going before it finally fires up, which is not normal for a car, especially like this one. There is really only two possible reasons you have a condition like that: a problem with the ignition system, i.e. spark, while it's cranking over, or fuel. And I'm not suspecting spark just at the moment because I'm not getting misfire codes. The only code that very rarely will pop up is an O2 sensor on that bank. So the mixture is, every once in a while, it's tripping. And like I said, the hard starting is really the main thing I'm investigating, but that leaves the fuel system to test. And just last week, I replaced the fuel filter, and when I replaced the fuel filter, the original pump sprang a leak. So I replaced the fuel pump when doing the fuel filter. So we know that the source pressure of the fuel should be good. What that leaves as a possibility for this condition is the fuel pressure regulator, which is right under the corner of that air box there. And of course that, as the name implies, regulates the fuel pressure starting and running. I actually have a history with this type of issue on a GM truck that I had. Those were notorious for having issues with the fuel pressure regulator, which is pretty much the identical regulator used on this Mercedes, just visually speaking. I don't know if the part number matches, but the conditions that I experienced with the GM truck were exactly the same. And sure enough, testing with one of these test kits, which you can rent, showed that the fuel pressure regulator on that truck was bad. Once I replaced it, it was like a whole new truck firing up. So what I'm going to do today is use this testing kit I rented from O'Reilly Auto Parts, and we're actually going to test the fuel pressure at the fuel rail here. You can see there's a test nipple where you can actually connect this, and we're going to see under various conditions and times what the fuel pressure is. Most importantly, see if the pressure is held by the regulator as it should be. If we get lucky, it'll test bad, because replacing that regulator is quite easy once you pop off the air filter. Now, I found the best way to do this when you're by yourself is you connect the gauge directly to the Schrader valve right on the fuel rail, and then set the gauge on your windshield, hold it down with the windshield wiper, and then you can read the gauge from inside the car while cranking it. And the other thing is you can have your phone there recording right as you're cranking, so you have a perfect record of the readings at various stages of turning the key, cranking it, and the car running. Alright, now that the car is running after a cold start, I'm going to go ahead and just pull the vacuum hose off the regulator to see if the pressure jumps up a little bit, as it should. Oh yeah. Yep, she's fallen. This shouldn't happen. This should hold up pressure. I don't know what the exact drop rate is per hour, but it should not drop this quick. So this certainly explains for sure why this car, would be hard to start. Like if I let this sit for, I don't know, another few minutes, or even now, it may take longer than it should to start, especially if it was sitting for an hour, because it wouldn't have that built-up fuel pressure, which you're definitely going to need. So I'll come back and check this in, I don't know, 15-20 minutes, but this dramatic of a drop-off right away, that tells me the fuel pressure regulator is bad. And pretty much any car is going to be like this, where the same test will show you if that regulator is bad. And By the way, on this car, it's relatively easy to see. It's that little guy here, and there's the feed line coming from the fuel pump at the back of the car. There's a return line, of course, for the excess fuel, and then you got your vacuum hose there, which actually connects right here on the manifold. Compared to the GM, where you had to take off the whole intake manifold, thank God, Mercedes made it super simple. Here we are, about an hour and 45 minutes later, and we basically got nothing for fuel pressure. So if I had to guess, if I went to start this car, it would crank over quite a few cycles and even stumble in between as the car struggles to run on fumes. Here's our new Bosch fuel pressure regulator for the princely sum of $34. So next, we're going to pull off the engine cover and the air box and replace the regulator, which is right about the corner there on the air box. Now with the covers removed, we can see that fuel injection rail test port that we used earlier to hook up the pressure gauge and validate the pressure would drop and determine the regulator is bad. And the regulator is right there. You got one vacuum hose going to the manifold, and it's actually held in, I believe, by a little snap ring. It's a little bit hard to see because it's dirty, but you can see just barely see the two holes for the snap ring, so we'll need to use the snap ring pliers. And I believe that's a snap ring that we compress to take off. We'll have to see. But anyway, you pop that snap ring, and you're going to need a snap ring pliers with fairly long tips to reach down here, because if they're not long, the tool's going to not be able to get past the ridge in the regulator here. So I had to pull these out a little bit, then tighten the set screws, assuming you're using this common style. But again, they're going to have to compress the snap ring first. Now we got the snap ring removed. When it's fully expanded like this, it actually fits into the groove there at the edge here. All around there, goes into the edge. So now this thing should just pop right out with a little bit of wiggling. It uses O-rings, so you'll probably have to rock it back and forth for this to come out. Plus it's been in there probably since the factory. So here's the regulator. I found what was easiest was just to grip it in the jaws of a standard pliers and rock it back and forth like this while just pulling up gently, and sure enough it popped out. You can see there's the fuel injection rail. Now what I would do very carefully is clean that surface so we don't get that gunk down the fuel injectors. Before I pulled this out, I did actually spray some brake clean around the area, but you definitely want to clean that up. Here we can see the new part on the right, which has a plastic body on the lower part, whereas presumably this is the factory OE, has metal, and this Bosch is the OE replacement, but looks like they've likely cheapened up the manufacturing process a bit, but who knows if that really changes the longevity, but thought I'd mention that. All right, so the regulator is now seated in fully, because you can see how the little slot for the O-ring is now just above the body of the regulator. So you'll be able to put your snap ring in and have it lock in. To get this guy in there, what I first did is put it in and just kind of wiggled back and forth while pressing with my palm, because there is two O-rings that essentially have to slip in there, and it is a good idea to lubricate those with just a little bit of gas. To actually get it fully seated in there, I just gave it a few light, and I mean light, close taps with a large rubber mallet. And I guess if you don't have a rubber mallet, do the same with a soft piece of wood and a hammer, but exercise extreme caution. Okay, so we got our snap ring seated. This thing will not move as it should. Should not be moving upwards. Now the temptation might be to just go and turn the key and fire it up, but given that this is the high pressure entry point on this fuel rail, we got to do our due diligence and check for any fuel leaks in the off chance this just did not get seated properly. So I'm just going to take a piece of dry paper towel and lay it over there, and we're going to turn the key and see if there's any fuel that sprays up on this or gets down in there. All right, so our towel was bone dry after cycling the key a couple times, not starting it, just turning it all the way to the position just before starting. Cycled the fuel pump a few times, and sure enough, not a drop of fuel there or on my towel. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is open the garage, and we're going to fire the engine up and just check for any leaks. And we are 5x5. And the car started just fine, it's running good, no leaks, so I think we are good. The final thing I'm going to check is turning off the car after running a few minutes and seeing if it just fires right up with a short turn of the key, rather than before the engine would need to crank over quite a few times and stumble before it would start, since it would have no fuel pressure. Alright, here's a good warm start with the proper regulator. Fires right up.